Hidden in a cleft amongst the ivy, a nest of young birds is steadily growing. Not rare or exotic, Britain's favourite bird, the robin. And if they have their way, they'll be popping through your letterbox on a card at Christmas. What a lovely way to start this episode of Springwatch. Hello and welcome to Springwatch. It's the last of our programmes in week 2, and if you've been watching the earlier ones, you'll know that we've made a few changes this year. We're all strictly adhering to the government guidelines in terms of the COVID protocols, so technically it's very different, but we've tried to maintain the flavour. In fact, we're enriching the flavour, bringing you the very best of British wildlife, the pure and simple beauty of nature, trying to put a smile on your face and a spring in your step. And tonight will be no different at all. Today is World Environment Day, but we're not going to think about the rest of the world. We're going to concentrate on the UK and even somewhat closer to home, the things that might be in our back garden. And we're going to be concentrating on the fabulous beasts that are out there and where to find them. Not that some of you need any help to find them at all. Look at this. Johnny Easterby found these moths in his garden in mid-Wales. This is a shark moth, vibrating its muscles to warm up. And if you wanted to start with a fabulous beast, the large elephant hawk moth is certainly a good place. The colouring is absolutely sensational stuff. But it's not about the bright and the beautiful all the time. Sometimes it's the little things that mean most of all, even when they're on a kitchen table in Essex. Yes, Ross Burney filmed this. It's a newt's egg, and inside you can see the little embryo, the developing newt pole. Look at that, the start of magical life. Sensational. What a beautiful little cameo of nature on a kitchen table. And of course we like cameos of nature, and that's why we've rigged our cameras on birds' nests down in the Mendip Hills. You see a range of them here. Why don't we take a look at the tree creepers? Let's go live to our tree creepers. And they've hidden their nest behind a fragment of bark that's peeling away from the tree, and you can see the young birds in there. We were worried about these birds when we first started watching them. A great spotted woodpecker turned up, and they are predators of tree creepers. Didn't come back though, and you can see those young are developing. You can even see their little curved bills there, look, developing to look like the adults already. We can also go live to our reed warbler's nest. Here we are at an ever more precarious angle. The reeds are growing much more rapidly on one side of the nest than the other, and that is canting it to one side. But the young have not fallen out. They're still there, as you can see in the lovely evening light. I say they're still there. There are some of our birds that have already fledged the nest. Jackdaws. We had 2 jackdaws in this nest box. The first one's gone there, and here goes the second one. And there have been lots of comings and goings at this nest, not the chicks up until now, but other adults looking in and out. Here are our chaffinches, and they're going with aplomb. No hanging around here. Look at that, straight into the face of the camera. There's always one that seems to be left behind, but a little while later, that one leaves too and scrambles out into the big wide world. Now, one nest that we have been looking at a lot is this, our blue tits. It was a one-parent family, just the female. She had 2 youngsters left in there, and there were lots of crossed fingers hoping that they would fledge, and she's made it. She's got 2 of them out. What about that? A great achievement. And here are those reed warblers, and as you can see, not such a dramatic fledging event, that one, as the chaffinches. I have to say that reed warbler rather skulks away into the reeds. And if you want to keep an eye on all of those nests, you can 24/7 on the BBC iPlayer and the BBC Springwatch website. Keep an eye on those, lots of activity. But when it comes to sensational nest and fabulous beast, try topping this one. Look at this. This is a goshawk on its nest. Here are the young, and in comes the male with some fresh greenery. Superb, absolutely superb. A bit of debate about why they bring in the greenery. Some people say it's just strengthening the body of the nest. Others that it acts as a sort of a tablecloth. They're bringing in lots of prey, of course, and dismembering it. So it does get a bit dirty there. Some people think it's just covering up what remains of the previous prey items. Others that these particular plants have an active antibacterial component to them, or also that it's reducing the amount of parasites in the nest. But look there, the chicks are up and about. They've grown considerably, as you can see. Started off with small white balls. Now they're wobbling about on their feet. You can see their wing feathers developing. It's not going to be too long before they transform into avian terminators. The goshawk, a fabulous beast. And Yolo, come on, honestly, mate, can you beat a goshawk's nest?
Well, Chris, I do like a goshawk. I like a goshawk's nest even more, and I'm not quite sure I can beat it, but I do reckon I can match it with a long-eared owl nest. Not up here in sunny Montgomeryshire where I am, but 2 hours south of me down in Monmouthshire, where we have a camera on a long-eared owl nest. And if you've been watching for the last 2 weeks, of course, this will be quite a familiar sight by now. There's the nest, high up in a pine plantation, and by day, the chicks, the 3 well-grown chicks, now don't do very much because they're strictly nocturnal. Both parents now will be away hunting mice, voles and small birds out on the adjacent moorland there. That gives the youngsters time to do what we call branching. That means that they're walking out onto the branches, exploring their little world, exercising their wings as well. That's really important. They need to build up these big flight muscles that they have, and you can see on the larger chick the primary's just starting to come through. Now the next morning at dawn, as it lit up, we were quite concerned to see just 2 chicks in that nest. It's the eldest chick and the youngest chick. So what's happened? Well, definitely a tawny owl didn't come in at night and take that youngster, as sometimes happens. So we sent Alistair Grubb, one of the cameramen, down there to have a look around, and beneath the nest, beneath the tree, he found the dead chick. It happens. It happens. When they nest high up like this, chicks will fall out of nests. We know that it happened on a goshawk nest on Springwatch last year. So we spoke to people at the BTO, our friends over there at the British Trust for Ornithology, and asked them, have you got any facts and figures on how often long-eared owl chicks fall out of nests? And they said, well, we haven't got enough data on long-eared owls, but we do have information on tawny owls where the chicks do exactly the same thing. And they said remarkably that when the nest is lower down in the tree, you find that more chicks fall out, excuse me, onto the floor and die. And the reason for that is because there are fewer branches for them to go out and explore, and fewer branches when they fall for them to cling onto. So that, unfortunately, is what happened to our long-eared owl chick. But look on the bright side, the other 2 are doing remarkably well. And of course, we've already seen some of our live cameras down in the Mendips, so let's go and have a look at the Dunnock nest, because, Gillian, I believe there's been quite a bit of activity down there.
There certainly has. This is live on our Dunnock nest. We introduced this family earlier in the week. There's 3 chicks at the moment in the nest. The parents have been coming and going. We've seen both male and female. The female is ringed. They're clearly not here at the moment. This is what we saw earlier, though. Now, the female there just left the nest. And what's really interesting about this is we get a lovely view, a top-down view of this nest. There's lots of eating, sleeping and repeat in this nest, and the chicks are looking quite large there. They're getting quite close to fledging. The female returns and we get this view, top-down, looking at all the action from above. And what we see is this. Now you see the chicks open up their mouths, waiting to be fed. And if you look really carefully, what you'll see there are the tongue spots in each of their mouths. Now, the received wisdom is these tongue spots help the parents decide, choose which chick to feed. And in fact, when you see Dad returning to the nest here, he really looks like he's making a choice, deciding which one to feed first. However, latest research shows that they don't use these tongue spots at all, and what mechanism they're using is still to be discovered, but that just goes to show how much mystery there still is in the natural world. So that's all the action up on our Mendip hub. We've got Gordon in Scotland, and Gordon, what do you have your sights set on?
Well, it is a wild and windy lakeside. Over this week, we've enjoyed a variety of wildlife and have enjoyed a variety of weather. Sunshine, beautiful calm mornings, mist on the lake, a lot of heavy rain, and now this wind. And if we go over to our recent shots of the nest, we see that the male osprey is enjoying this wind as well. He's been doing a lot of fishing. When he splashes down, he comes up, he shakes off most of the water from his feathers, but he was using that high wind to flap about and get completely dry. So I have been filming some fantastic beasts, and later in the show, I'll tell you where I found them.
We look forward to that, Gordon. We look forward to that. Now, of course, we have our own cameras out in the Mendip Hills and in South Wales and up there with Gordon, but we've also been taking a look at some of our partners' cameras. So, look, let's take a look at a camera which is up here off the coast of Northumberland at a place called Coquet Island. It's an RSPB reserve, and here's the feed from their camera. This is live now. And as we cut to it live, you just saw the puffin flying away. And that, folks, is what we call the wonder of live wildlife television. You should have been here 2 seconds ago. But there are just a couple of puffins left around that area. I say a couple of puffins left around it. There were 25,000 puffins on this tiny island, 8 hectares in size. 8 hectares is about the size of 8 rugby pitches. So that's a lot of birds in one small spot. And they've doubled their numbers in the last 3 years. We think because they've been displaced from elsewhere. Certainly, fabulous beast, the puffin. Those colourful bills, not just about attracting mates, but also carrying the fish. Do you know what the record is in the UK for carrying fish in the bill of a puffin? So I'll tell you, it's 62 sand eels. And they're able to achieve that because they've got a spiny little tongue, which they use to catch the first fish and then hold it in place as they catch the second fish and the 61st fish, and then lastly, the 62nd fish. Remarkable adaptation that those puffins have. We like to go to the coast, obviously, for exercise, and we like that marine environment. And many of our country's most fabulous beasts undoubtedly live there. But we do have to show some of them respect, as Gillian finds out in this film. In fact, it's not just respect. We have to show some sensibility when it comes to social distancing between us and them.
The Cornish coast is home to some of the most exciting wildlife in the country. And top of that list is arguably one of the most charismatic species, the grey seal.
Today I'm helping the Cornwall Seal Group Research Trust to monitor the size, health and numbers of the local seal population.
Normally at this time of year, there would be thousands and thousands of visitors around the Cornish coastline. But this year, it's fallen silent, and that's just as well for grey seals.
Spring is critical for grey seals, as this is when they molt. After long hunting trips in the open ocean, they return to shore to shed last year's coat and grow a new one. This provides an ideal opportunity to record them better.
So I've come out to this site here because just offshore there on those rocks is a known grey seal haul out site. You can really see that this can only be approached by sea and for anything that is brave enough to haul up on those rocks out there.
The research group has monitored grey seals in the southwest since 2000.
At the moment, I can only see one grey seal hauled out, but they are amazingly camouflaged. That one there is mottled in almost exactly the same colours of the rocks. So being able to photograph them with this telephoto lens here gives us an opportunity to take in the whole scene and take that back and analyse it to make sure that we haven't missed any.
Photographing their unique markings allows the group to identify and track individual animals. We're also using a drone to get a more complete picture of the site. All this data, along with surveys from other sites around Cornwall, creates a detailed picture of the overall health of the local seal population. Although personally, it's disappointing not to see more seals, this is still vital data for the group as they study the impact of human and seal interaction.
Disturbance is one of the biggest threats to grey seals, and we're almost 200 metres away from that haul-out site, but even so, we've got to be extremely cautious.
When they're in the water, seals are incredibly playful and inquisitive, often showing curiosity towards humans. So when you see them hauled out with their big puppy dog eyes, you could be forgiven for thinking they're still as confident. But on land, they're clumsier and much more wary, so likely to resubmerge if disturbed. This may seem harmless, but it has serious consequences for a molting seal. Basking on land allows the seals to warm up, bringing blood to the hair follicles in their skin. This encourages new hair growth to replace last year's coat. But when startled, they plunge back into the cold water, and the blood withdraws from the skin surface, interrupting the molting process.
So for every time the seals are disturbed, they've got to spend even longer hauled out on land. And this doesn't just compromise their life expectancy, but it can cause the whole haul-out site to be abandoned. So how do you enjoy watching grey seals without disturbing them? Well, for one, keep your distance, a minimum of 150 meters at least, and watch your profile and keep your voices down. Most important thing, though, is leave the seals as you found them. That is absolutely incredible. That day out on the north coast, what a beautiful stretch of coastline. And I know only one seal showed up, but it's still such a treat to see them. Now, like I said, human disturbance is a big problem for our grey seal population. And just to give you an idea of how big a problem this is, some of the latest data released by the Cornwall Seal Group Research Trust, they monitored 4 separate haul-out sites around the coast last summer. And what they recorded was that an average of every 14 minutes during their haul-outs, the seals were disturbed. And that's an incredibly high amount. The disturbance rates have actually doubled in less than 7 years. So this is a growing problem. But it is a problem that we can fix with just a little bit of understanding. So when a ski seal isn't frightened, this is what it likes to do. It likes to take its time getting in the water. I mean, it's a little bit like me getting in the water over here. It is cold, and we can relate to this because they feel cold shock too, and they take so long, we've had to speed this up a little bit just to make the point. So they feel the cold just like we do, especially on their extremities, around their fins, around their face, where they lack that insulating blubber. And once in, this one slips away into the water. But that is the ideal way of getting into the water after you've had a nice, lazy time hauling out in the sun. However, it's different when they're frightened. Now, I have to warn you, this next clip is really hard viewing, but if you need any convincing that flushing seals off their haul-out sites harms them, then this is going to convince you. Now, this was filmed on St. Mary's Island in Northumberland. And it's accessed by walkers at low tide. And clearly some walkers have gotten a bit too close despite all the signage, and they've started this stampede. Now it's low tide, so the seals have no choice but to fling themselves off. And the waterline is so low that it's clear that really serious injuries are sustained when this happens. So how can we learn from this? Well, I'd like to tell you a story about a seal that was called Septimus. Now, Septimus was a magnificent adult male seal. He was 2.5 meters long. He was the third biggest seal to ever be seen in Cornwall. And he was called Septimus because he had this little white patch above his upper lip. About 5 years ago, Septimus was found dead, washed up on shore, and his body was recovered by the team, the Cornwall Seal Group. And they recovered all his bones, and this is Septimus now. And I've got to be honest, like, the first time I saw Septimus, I was lost for words, and I really want to give you a chance to just take this all in, because he is, even in death, a fabulous-looking beast, and we've really taken good care of him under this shelter. Now, what was extraordinary about Septimus, and the team at the Seal Group could not have known this when they recovered his body, is that his skeleton is a record of all the injuries he sustained through his life. And we can show you through these. Now, the earliest injury that he received, probably when he was still very young, was down here just above the pelvis. And you can see that the bone is misshapen over here. And this is likely because he was young, the bones are still malleable, and rather than fracturing, they just bent. So he lived with that injury right through from his very young. The second injury he sustained was Septimus was shot at, and we know that because there's a lead shot embedded in his ribs. And there must have been at least 50 more, maybe more lead shot in his flesh as well. But this one is the only one that embedded in his bone. And again, we know he survived this because the bone has grown around the lead shot itself. The third injury, believe it or not, is the broken bones on his ribs over here. Now, these are really, really bad breaks. This is the sort of thing that happens when seals are flushed off their haul outsides, like we saw on that clip. And again, he survived this injury, and he would have had to swim and forage and do all the things that seals have to do with that sort of injury. He would have been in a lot of pain. And finally, on the skull here, this is probably what finished Septimus off. There was an infection, a sinus infection, that eventually ate into his skull, and that's the likely cause of death. Now, these are just 4 separate incidents on his skeleton, and there's loads of other hazards that seals encounter. It's called a cumulative human impact. So the other things that seals have to tackle out there would be things like entanglement, things like marine plastic pollution, other types of pollution, and of course, like I said, human disturbance. And certainly at this time of year, or at least in the summer months, there are going to be plenty of us heading out on the, enjoying our summer holidays out on the coastline. And of course, we want to enjoy our wildlife. Of course, we want to see these beautiful, beautiful animals. But we really, really need to consider how we can give them a little bit more space. And so that is the story of Septimus, and I think he is a magnificent, magnificent creature. Like I said, in life, he was an amazing character. In death, he still has this amazing story to tell, and an ambassador for his species. So that is Septimus. So like I said, in the summer holidays, we're going to be enjoying lots and lots of coastal experiences. Some other summer experiences involve other creatures as well, and some that might not be quite so welcome. In fact, some that we might consider a pest. And I'm talking about wasps. Now, these are much maligned and very misunderstood creatures. And this is something that Chris would like to change.
I've come out into the garden to answer a question. And that question is going to be posed many times at this time of year. People dusting off their barbecues, pouring themselves a beer or a soft drink in the garden. And the question on their lips is going to be, what are wasps for? Well, I hear it all the time. If I'm honest with you, it irks me a little bit. But I'm finally going to explain it to everyone. I'm going to tell you what wasps are for. This old barn door is quite special. You see all these little grey vertical lines here? All of these patterns, every single one of these stripes has been made by a busy, industrious wasp. Now, the sun's shining on the door today, and I've noticed that there are some queen wasps coming to collect this wood. And if I'm patient, one might just turn up and oblige. But I will have to cover my mouth when I'm talking because they don't like the smell of mammal breath. If I had all the hours I'd spent waiting for wasp, I'd probably spend them waiting for wasps. Look at this. This is fantastic. I'm going to cover my mouth so she can't smell my breath. I'm just a few centimetres away from a queen common wasp. She's just been away to a pool somewhere. She's filled up with water so she can generate lots of saliva. And then she's backing slowly down the door, using her sharp mandibles to rasp away at the surface, rolling up a bolus of wood pulp. I can even hear her if I put my head against the door. Oh my goodness, I can hear her scraping through the door. What about that? Superb. Absolutely superb. So she's just flown off somewhere to where she's making a nest in a small chamber. It could be in a mouse hole beneath the ground. It could be somewhere up in the rafters of a barn like this, or even in a bird box. And I've got one of those nests here. This was one that was made last summer. Tiny little ball made by the queen. And note the fact that the surface of it is green. It was made from wood pulp that was taken from this door. It's a nest with history. And here in my hand you can see the tiny, tiny set of cells that she made to lay those eggs in. They make tiers of combs which go down through the nest, and then this is the sort of finished home for one of our wasp species. So you can see the paper envelope on the outside here, which protects the nest from drafts, will keep it cool or warm depending on the temperature. Each one of these lines on the paper here is one bolus of wood pulp. So one of these scraping sessions has produced each one of these lines. So you can imagine how industrious the wasps have to be to make a nest like this. And then of course inside the nest, and if I take it apart here, you'll be able to see what remains of some of the comb. Hexagonal cells, just like a bee's honeycomb. And into these, the wasp lay their egg. When the grub hatches, they have to feed it. And they feed it on meat. So they're out hunting all the time. Flies, caterpillars, other invertebrates. And this is one of the reasons why wasps are good things, because they're maintaining a balance, sorting out the ecology of these types of insects. And particularly if you're a gardener, do you want your garden overrun with hungry caterpillars munching all of your flowers, your fruit and veg? Probably not. The wasps are doing invaluable work. No chemicals required. Let the wasps do the gardening for you. They don't just eat meat, they need fuel. And for that, they want nectar. So they're constantly visiting flowers for energy. And as they do so, when they're dipping their heads into the flower to drink that nectar, they're getting the pollen on their heads. We often think of bees as being the most important pollinators, but these guys are playing a very important role too. So when people say to me, "What are wasps for?" I try to resist saying, "What are you for?" I tell them what I've told you. They are ecologically essential. They are great for controlling other invertebrate populations. They are beautiful and they're fascinating. I love wasps. One of the things I missed in my big cell for wasps is quite how beautiful they are. If you look at them in close-up, you don't swat them, if you look at them, they are exquisitely beautiful. And I'm joined here by Megan McCubbin, my stepdaughter. We've been self-isolating for the last 11 weeks, and that's why we're not maintaining our 2 metres distance here. But we love wasps.
Oh, it's so underrated. And underloved mainly. And there's a reason why we're stood by this beautiful old oak tree, and that's because it's incredibly attractive at the moment to a lot of queen hornets, queen Eurasian hornets, who are coming in to feed upon the secretion of ghost moth larvae that are buried into the wood, producing the secretion that's attracting them from all over. But unfortunately, they don't seem to be here at the moment.
Well,
If we
no,
do
no,
go on-
you know, but we did see some just moments ago, a
We
bit like
did.
that puffin. You know, they were
Moments
here just
ago.
moments ago on the tree, and I can see a couple up there. Anyway, look, if they come back, we'll see them.
They're
Look,
beautiful.
here they
They're
are.
our
Look at that.
largest wasp in the UK. I mean, oh, they're
Stunning.
just stunning. Those colours, those eyes.
Yeah.
Look at it scaling that tree.
Big eyes, so big that they actually hunt at night. So whereas most of the other social wasps will go, there's one on the tree. Look, it's
Here we are.
just pitched up on the side. Oh, that's what live
Beautiful.
wildlife TV's about. Queen hornets on the side of a tree. That's what you pay your licence fee for. They
it
never
might-
let me down, the hornet.
They never do. They can never let you down, not a hornet. But you might be surprised to know that in the UK, we have 9,000 different species of wasps, which is incredible. And most of them aren't social. Only 9 species live in colonies and rear young. The rest are entirely solitary, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and we've got one here. We've got a fabulous collection of insects that we borrowed from the Natural History Museum here. And I'd like to draw your attention to this one down here. This is Eumenes. Now, it looks like a small black wasp, but no, this is an artisan. Look at what it makes when it's building its nest. This, out on the heath, is a wasp which sculpts a little pot. It's called a potter wasp. And here you can see a female making one of these tiny little pots. They fly off, they catch caterpillars, they paralyse them, and then they stick about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, up to 14 of those caterpillars. Look, see her loading that caterpillar into the little pot, and then she will seal the pot up after laying an egg on that caterpillar, which of course hatches out and eats the caterpillar. But I'm going to show you something really special now, and I don't get this out for anyone. This is the Fabergé egg of Chris's Natural History collection, because I've got one of these little pots here from a related species. Oh, look at this. More valuable than anything from the Ming dynasty. Look at that. Isn't it absolutely exquisite?
So small, isn't it? You can really see the scale there.
Yeah, to think that a little insect has made this as a horror chamber for paralysed caterpillars. Yeah.
But what a beautiful piece of biological architecture that really
It is, isn't it? It is. Okay.
But of course, wasps come in all different shapes and sizes, and some nests are slightly more gruesome than others. Now have a look at this sneaky individual. Now, you might be mistaken for thinking this is an ant, and it looks very, very similar to one, but it's not. It's a wasp that is mimicking an ant.
It looks just like a wood ant.
It looks exactly like a wood ant, but this is called a Methocha artilicta. Amazing.
It is. It's an amazing little thing,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And the females, what they'll do is they'll scour the soil there, looking for the burrows of hosts, which they can lay their eggs into to produce their young. So what they do is they'll go around, here she is, you can see her scuttling. She'll be trying to find, no. So that there is a tiger beetle larvae. And he was hoping that he would get himself a nice snack as an ant, but of course he was tricked, and of course the wasp went down. She's covered in a really hard thorax, so she doesn't mind being captured by him. She goes down and stings him, paralysing him, and then she will lay her egg onto his body there. You can see her doing that, stinging him there. Isn't it incredible? Those
Amazing.
burrows can be 30 centimetres deep. She'll come back up, she'll fill it in. There's the egg right there. Amazing. And it will take about 2 to 3 weeks for these larvae to develop. And what they'll do is they'll feed on that tiger beetle larvae all the way until it's unfortunately perished. But they'll start with the least vital organs first. They'll leave the nervous system and the heart to last. So to keep it going and to keep it fresh.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It's a nightmare. I mean, but the best thing about it is, right, so she's come along, she's stung it, she's paralysed it, she's laid its egg on it, which her own larvae will eventually eat, but then she nicks its burrow for its larvae to grow in.
Doesn't even make
Oh,
their own
it's
burrow.
amazing. Doesn't make her own burrow.
Think that's amazing? I'm going to show you just a couple more of these incredible wasps. Have a look at this one. This is a thing called a giant wood wasp, and this lays its eggs using this long ovipositor into the wood, and at the same time as it does that, it inoculates the wood with a form of fungus that makes that wood more palatable to its developing larvae. Top stuff until you meet the sabre wasp, Rissa, this one. And this one has this extraordinary ovipositor here. And what this animal does is it uses its antennae on the trees. I've seen them. They go onto the tree, they tap their antennae on the surface of the tree like this. They go backwards and forwards until they precisely locate the developing larva of the wood wasp. They twist their bodies around and they insert that ovipositor into the tree. It's tipped with a high concentration of metals. It's rock hard at the tip, and they saw it into the wood. It's a process that can take up to an hour, and then deep in the wood they lay their egg onto the developing larvae of the other wasp. Of course, it hatches out, eats the non-essential organs, and then turns into Rissa.
It's beautiful.
Extraordinary thing, isn't it? And such a beautiful animal. And of all the things we're showing you today, I would like to think that that's probably the most fabulous beast of all. And that's why we like wasps.
Love
Gordon.
wasps. We love wasps. But I mean, Gordon, how are you finding those midges over there? We're loving wasps, but how are they?
With this wind, there is not a single midgie. It is really blustery, and that's actually putting off the midges, and it seems to be putting off the osprey because there's nothing going on behind me. Whenever I think of midges, I think of the very, very first Springwatch back in 2005. I was up on the Isle of Mull, and it was unbearable. It's never been as bad as that since. But yeah, if you want midges, go to Loch Freesa, first week of June. So we're going to go to the most recent live action from the osprey nest. This was great. I filmed this earlier on, and it was the male coming in with the fish. He actually caught that fish within about 3 minutes. It's not the biggest, but it's certainly not the smallest. This is when things get really serious for this family. He's got to fish more and more. She's got to feed these chicks. As I said before, they're getting bigger before my very eyes. 3 months' time, those little chicks are going to be flying to Africa. So it's about catching fish, feeding, catching fish, feeding, fledge, learn to catch fish yourself, and off you go to Africa. It's unbelievable. So tonight's show is all about fantastic beasts and where to find them. So I've filmed fantastic beasts over the lake, on the lake, but I've caught some fantastic beasts on my camera trap around the lake. So we've got osprey, we've got sea eagle here, plenty of fish in the lake, so no surprise that there is the biggest otter I have ever seen. I filmed this just 30 metres from where I'm standing, really very close. Another animal that showed up, incredibly timid creature, not like the urban foxes that I see in Glasgow. This fox on top of the rock, he's been patrolling the lakeside. Got lots of footage of him, but really timid, very aware of the camera. This next creature, it's not a yeti. It seems to be a sheep that has got some kind of idea that it's a director. This clip I almost deleted because I didn't spot that tiny little red squirrel. So lots of things around the lake that's actually sort of kind of harder to see, not as visible as the osprey and certainly the sea eagle. This year has been a bumper year for pine cones. So all of these millions of trees means that there are gazillions of pine cones. So I went off in search of a pine cone specialist, Scotland's own little parrot. It's not a parrot, it's a crossbill, but I think they look like parrots. You see that bill of theirs crosses over. It is been adapted to prise open those pine cones to get to the seeds inside. Before I arrived, I was told that there was flocks of crossbills here. There were so many pine cones with so many seeds. All these crossbills came, but I was maybe a day or two a bit too late because they'd migrated on. When I first arrived here just a week or so ago, Scotland was still fully locked down. I had special dispensation to come over and start looking for animals. And I was told about a very interesting fox den. Interesting for two reasons. One, that it was in full view, 25 metres from the nearest tree, right beside a really busy road. And the second interesting point about them was this was a mixed litter. We had two different families, but two fox cubs were very large, and two that were small. Four that were small. So it's probably siblings, or maybe a mother and daughter that have set up home together. As things got busier, I wasn't surprised to find out that fox family has moved on. You know, in Glasgow, I think when a fox sees a person or hears a person, it probably thinks kebab or fish and chips. In the countryside, they see people and they think, quite rightly, rifle. The biggest thrill for me this year has been the raptors on this lake. Those osprey, I love them. I think because they're endlessly fascinating and almost constantly visible. The fact that they swoop down so persistent, so wonderfully adapted for that single role of catching fish. The fact that they can fly with fish almost the same weight of themselves. And another undisputably beautiful bird, the sea eagle. I was blown away by this scene that I saw on my very first morning. It was amazing, not something that I'd forget quickly. It's been an amazing week. I've filmed some magnificent wildlife. It's been great to share it with you, but I hear that Iolo has got a magnificent creature down in Wales.
Let me tell you a story. It's a tale that's told to every school child in Wales. Now, legend has it that a huge fire-breathing dragon lives in an isolated cave in the highest mountains in Wales. It emerges only when Wales is under threat. Out it comes. It smites its enemies, sends them scattering to all four corners of the globe, and then returns to its lair. But it's always ready to return when it's needed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, hold on tight to your cups of tea, because the Welsh dragon is back. Have a look at this. Okay, maybe it's not the fire-breathing dragon of old. It is a sand lizard, Wales's rarest reptile. And this photograph was taken by Pete Hill at Ynys Dunes over on the west coast, not too far away from where I am here now. So what happened to the sand lizard? Well, they used to be far more widespread than they are now. But because of habitat loss, habitat degradation, by the late 1960s, they were extinct in Wales. Indeed, they declined throughout the UK, and at one time, they survived in only 3 tiny pockets in England. 2 areas of lowland heath in the south and 1 area of coastal dune up in Lancashire. Well, this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the start of a sand lizard reintroduction scheme here in Wales. And if I'm looking rather smug, well, that's because I played a very, very small part in that reintroduction scheme. Let's go back to 2006, and I was privileged enough to be invited by a group of scientists and sand lizard experts to release these birds back to Tywyn Burrows on the west coast. Look at me, I look like a 12-year-old. I had a full head of hair then. Now, in total, 1,265 sand lizards were released at 5 coastal sand dune sites in North Wales. Where are those sites? Well, walk over with me and I'll show them to you on this map here. The first release was over here, Morfa Harlech on the west coast. That was in 1995. That was followed in 2003 by Gronant Dunes. Then the next year, the adjacent site, Talacre Warren there. Then back here to the Tywyn Burrows, where I was briefly involved in 2006. And finally, just the other side of the Dyfi estuary, Ynys Dunes there in 2009, and I'm delighted to be able to tell you that it's gone very well indeed. They have found evidence of breeding, successful breeding at all 5 sites. And I must say, I'm delighted, partly because it's brought a little bit of colour back to Wales, but also partly because they brought with them some incredible behaviour. Now, when these creatures first emerge in spring, they are quite bland looking, let's be honest about it. But there's a reason for this. They need to blend into the background. They need to be camouflaged because they're exothermic, they're cold-blooded, they need to warm up. So they've got to go out into the open, and there they're susceptible to being predated by birds like kestrels, by buzzards and by corvids. But in late April and May, a huge transformation takes place in the males. The flanks become beautiful green colour, and these are then called badges. Now, why is this? Well, some research has been carried out in Sweden, and what they've discovered is that the males fight in spring. Now, usually it's just posturing, it's just a standoff. They'll show their flanks to each other like this, they'll bob up and down, they'll try and make themselves look as big as they possibly can, and one of the rivals will then scurry away into the undergrowth, and the winner is the one with the biggest badge, the brightest, boldest stripe down its flanks. But what happens when 2 equal rivals come together? Well, again, they'll posture for a while, maybe 15 minutes or more. And if one doesn't yield, they start fighting with a vengeance. They throw themselves at each other like mini Komodo dragons until eventually there is a winner. Now, what of the females? Well, all this is going on. Well, they still look pretty drab. Let's be honest about it. They still look pretty camouflaged. They don't turn green like the males do. But what are they looking for? Well, they are actually looking for the males with the biggest badges, with the biggest, greenest flanks. Why? Well, because those males have the better genes and they produce more viable offspring than their lesser rivals. So once again in nature, we see so much effort going in to ensure that they pass their genes on to the next generation. And if you are a sand lizard, the bigger, the more colourful, the better. And I, for one, am delighted to see these wonderful creatures back in Wales where they belong. Right, okay. Take a deep breath and let that air out and come over here with me. Stop whatever you're doing, okay? Have a sit down, put that cup of tea down. It's our mindfulness moment. For the next 90 seconds, we are going to give you nothing but the natural sounds and sights of spring. No talking, no music. And this time, it's the opportunity of cameraman Josh Tarr, because he's been out filming a beautiful wild hedgerow down in Devon.
Josh, just beautiful. That hedgerow buzzing with bees and butterflies, brimming with birdsong. There's no doubt that hedgerows are a very important part of our ecosystems in the UK, but not just for the biodiversity, for their physical entity. They're needed for navigation. Now look, imagine it's pitch black and you find yourself for some reason in the middle of a field. You can't see anything. You would try and feel your way out of the field, but it would be quite difficult to know which direction you were moving in. But if you were at the side of the field, you would be able to feel that hedgerow and you'd be able to work your way around until you got to the gate, got back in your car, got safely home. But there are certain animals that use these hedgerows as acoustic landmarks for navigating their way across the landscape to find their food and return to their roosts. I'm talking about these, greater horseshoe bats. Now, just like all of our bat species, they use echolocation to find their way around, but they use very high frequencies, which are absorbed quite rapidly in the air, so they can only detect things about 5 or 10 metres away. Here they are, feasting away. They produce those sounds, or emit those sounds, through their extraordinary noses, and then pick them up again in those massive ears. But without the capacity to use hedgerows, they can't get from one place to another. With 5 or 10 metres of range of echolocation, they can't go across the middle of a field. They'd simply get lost. They need these hedgerows to be there. And we need them to be there for the bats, because these species declined 90% in the last century when we were losing so many of our hedgerows. It's clear that we have to make sure that these habitats are maintained. And it's not just about navigation. We came down here the other night, Megan and I, Springwatch had just finished, we hadn't had enough of the wildlife, so we came down with our mobile phones to see which bats were using this particular hedgerow. We've had a bat fly over already. And the neat thing about this detector is that it doesn't only produce a sonogram, but it can also tell you which species of bat it is with a pretty high degree of accuracy. I'll take the camera and you can test me on the bat.
Test you?
Confidence is pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Common pip.
I saw it fly that way.
Would you have guessed common pipistrelle? Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I believe
Right,
that.
go on then. Let's one. Test me on the
Go
next
on,
one.
okay. Yeah, the
Bat.
cheek of it.
Bat. Soprano pipistrelle. Soprano pipistrelle.
Oh, he's good. Very impressive. Yes, well done.
Yeah.
I mean, the likelihood of it being a soprano pip was quite high, wasn't it? You know.
Do you know how I identified that bat?
Go on, tell
I
me how.
smelled it.
Oh, no, that's such rubbish.
Look, can
Please.
you hold the ladder? Bit of health and safety.
Yeah, go on
I
then.
just want to show you the hedgerow that we've got here, because unfortunately, only 41% of the hedgerows in the UK are judged to be in favourable conditions, certainly favourable conditions when it comes to wildlife. And the reason for that, I'm afraid, is two things. It's either too much management or too little management. Now, to be honest with you, this end of my hedge here, we're allowing these hedgerow trees to come through. Further down, we're trying to manage it far better. And what a recent study conducted at Bristol University with the Bat Conservation Trust has shown is that hedgerows need to be cut about every 3 years to maximise their potential. Then you can get plenty of insects there. All of these surfaces for life provide lots of insects, food for birds, of course, in the daytime, and food for bats in the evening. And also the shelter they provide when there are inclement conditions, like driving rain, of course, and wind, means that on one side of the hedgerow, it's a bit windy here tonight on this side, but it's sheltered on the inside. So the bats will all be hunting on the inside of this hedgerow. And what that Bristol University and BCT study showed was, in fact, hedgerows are probably best for bats if they're left unmanaged for periods of up to 10 years. But it is tricky, because if you let them go too straggly, they just open up and you just get hedgerow trees like this. And if you flail them every year, so they're a row of picket stumps, they're of no use to wildlife at all. No berries, no flowers, no songposts for birds, and certainly no insects for bats. So we've got to think about managing our hedgerows a little better. We're coming towards the end of our programme now, and we can take a look at an extraordinary clip that's been sent to us by Sam Hawkins. This was in Devon. A hedgehog has somehow or other found its way into the sea, and it's swimming out to sea. This extraordinary rescue takes place. A man gets in the freezing cold water, swims out, brings the hedgehog back to the shore, make sure it's okay. I love this, I love this. Someone lowers a bucket and it's a bumpy ride, but the great news is that that hedgehog comes back to safety. I love those sorts of things. Very sadly, that's all we've got time for today and this week. We've been very pleased to have been joined by none other than Gordon Buchanan up in Scotland. Gordon, thanks so much for joining this week and showing us all of those fabulous ospreys. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You take care coming down from that ladder, OK? It's been a real pleasure to be part of this year's very different Springwatch, and a real joy to share this magical part of Scotland with all of you, the audience. Next week, I'm going to be at home watching Springwatch. The pipe, slippers, dog at my feet, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you all for watching. Bye.
Thanks, Gordon. You stay safe. Next week, we're joined by another guest presenter. We've got Ellie Howison, who will be joining us from close to her garden in the Cotswolds of Gloucestershire. We look forward to that. But of course, Springwatch is not about the presenters. The stars of the show are the animals. And I've got to tell you, next week, we've got a bevy of beauties for you.
Next week, I'll still be here in Cornwall, and you can guarantee I'll be keeping an eye out for those beaver kids.
I'll be introducing a new nest here in Wales. Have a look at this. It's the nest of the magnificent red kite, the national bird of Wales. We have a camera high up in a pine tree looking at those birds. Now, when I was a young lad, you could barely find a red kite, let alone a red kite nest. Magnificent.
Magnificent indeed, absolutely sensational. But we do have a range of other nests as well, of course. We've got our tree creepers. There they are, being fed by the adult. Our little robins that we saw at the very start of the show, they're doing really well. Dunnocks as well, tucked into the hedgerow. Our Canada geese, well, that nest has had lots of trials and tribulations, to be quite honest with you. There's always activity at the Canada geese, and we'll be keeping our eyes on our favourites, the coots, as well. They've got 6 young out of 8 eggs, and they've taken them out of the pond there, where there's plenty of activity. We've got all of those nests down in the Mendip Hills, and you can watch them 24/7 by joining them on the iPlayer and the BBC Springwatch website. If you can't wait until next Tuesday at 8 o'clock when we return, you can join us on social media from 9 o'clock on Monday morning when Hannah Stitford will be broadcasting. Megs and I are out to lunch at midday, and Hannah's back at 5 o'clock. And of course, if you're out and about this weekend with your phones and you capture any good wildlife or any rescues like that hedgehog one, we'd love to see them at BBC Springwatch and send them to Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. Other than that, see you next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Stay safe. Good night.
The Open University is inviting you to take part in its brand new citizen science project, OU Pollinator Watch, created to help us discover more about insect pollinators. To find out how to identify a selection of insect pollinators and share your very own observations or photos, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.